The military transport truck bounced along the dirt road leading away from Camp Phoenix in eastern Afghanistan, each pothole sending a jolt through Ruby Smith's exhausted body. At 26, she had just completed her second deployment as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division, and all she could think about was getting home to her husband Marcus in their cozy two-bedroom house in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She clutched her phone, scrolling through the last messages from Marcus, short, distant replies that she had attributed to him being busy with his new job at the automotive repair shop. "Can't wait to see you," she had texted him 3 days ago. His response, "Yeah, me too." Something felt off, but Ruby pushed the nagging feeling aside. Deployments were hard on relationships. Everyone knew that. They just needed to reconnect. As the truck pulled up to the airfield, Ruby shouldered her duffel bag and took one last look at the Afghan mountains. She had saved lives here, lost friends here, and grown from a naive young woman into someone who could remain calm under the most intense pressure. She was coming home different than when she left, stronger, more confident, with a clearer sense of her own worth. What she didn't know was that home had changed too, in ways she never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 18 months earlier, Ruby Smith had been a different person entirely. Fresh out of medical training at Fort Sam Houston, she was eager, optimistic, and deeply in love with her husband of 2 years, Marcus Williams. Their wedding had been a small affair at her parents' farm in rural Georgia. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, proud of his daughter who had chosen to serve her country. Ruby and Marcus had met during her junior year at the University of North Carolina, where she was studying pre-med and he was working toward a degree in automotive technology. Marcus was the steady, reliable type, not flashy or particularly ambitious, but solid. He had grown up in a working-class family in Charlotte, and his dreams were simple: a good job, a nice house, maybe kids someday. Ruby had been attracted to his stability after growing up with a father whose PTSD had made their household unpredictable. "You sure about this military thing?" Marcus had asked her when she first mentioned enlisting. They were sitting on the porch of their rental house watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I mean, I support you, but it's going to be hard on us." Ruby had taken his hand, her engagement ring catching the light. "It's only a few years, and think about what it'll do for my medical career afterward. Plus, the benefits will help us get ahead. We can buy a real house, maybe start that family we've talked about." Marcus had nodded, but she remembered now how his smile hadn't quite reached his eyes. Their first year of marriage before Ruby's initial deployment had been everything she had hoped for. Marcus worked at a local garage while she completed her advanced medical training. They spent evenings planning their future, looking at houses they couldn't yet afford, talking about names for children they didn't yet have. Ruby threw herself into learning everything she could about combat medicine, driven by the knowledge that someone's son or daughter might depend on her skills someday. "You're going to be incredible out there," Marcus would tell her as she studied late into the night. "Those soldiers are lucky to have someone who cares as much as you do." Ruby's parents had been supportive, but worried. Her mother, Sarah, had spent too many nights waiting for her father to come home from nightmares and flashbacks. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself," she had whispered during their goodbye at the airport. "And remember that you have a life waiting for you here." Her father, retired Army Sergeant James Smith, had been more direct. "Watch your six out there, kiddo. Trust your training, trust your unit, but most importantly, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Ruby's first deployment to Iraq had been a baptism by fire. As part of a forward surgical team, she had treated everything from minor injuries to life-threatening trauma. She had held the hands of 19-year-old soldiers as they died, performed emergency surgery in a tent during mortar attacks, and saved more lives than she could count. The experience had changed her profoundly. She had video called Marcus whenever possible, but the time difference and operational security requirements made regular communication difficult. She could see the strain in his face during their brief conversations, the way he seemed to have less and less to say as her deployment wore on. "How's work?" she would ask.
Same as always, fixed Mrs. Peterson's transmission today. How are your friends? Have you been getting out? Yeah, sometimes. Nothing exciting. The conversations grew shorter, more stilted. Ruby told herself it was normal. Deployment was hard on everyone. When she returned from Iraq after 8 months, Ruby had expected a joyful reunion. Instead, she found Marcus distant and moody. Their house felt different somehow. Smaller, less welcoming. Marcus had rearranged the living room, painted their bedroom a color she didn't like, and seemed annoyed when she mentioned it. "I lived here too while you were gone," he had said with an edge in his voice she'd never heard before. "I can't just put my life on hold for 8 months." Ruby had tried to understand. She knew she had changed during deployment. She was more confident, more decisive, less willing to defer to others on important matters. She had learned to trust her own judgment in life and death situations, and that confidence carried over into civilian life. When Marcus suggested they buy a car they couldn't afford, she put her foot down. When he wanted to take an expensive vacation on credit, she suggested they save money instead.
"You've become really controlling," Marcus complained one evening after she questioned his decision to lend money to a friend with a gambling problem. "It's like you think you know better than everyone else now." "I'm not trying to be controlling," Ruby had replied, genuinely confused. "I'm just thinking about our future. Isn't that what married couples are supposed to do?" But things had gradually improved as they readjusted to being together. Ruby had thrown herself into their relationship, planning date nights, cooking Marcus's favorite meals, trying to bridge the gap that had formed during her absence. By the time her second deployment came around, they seemed to be back on solid ground. "I'll miss you," Marcus had said at the airport, holding her tight, "but I'll be here when you get back. Always." Ruby had believed him completely. Her second deployment to Afghanistan had been different from the first. More experienced now, she had been assigned to a mobile surgical unit that moved throughout Kandahar province, providing medical support to forward operating bases. The work was demanding and dangerous, but Ruby thrived in the high-pressure environment. She had been recommended for promotion and had even been asked to consider making the military a career. She had called Marcus with the news, excited to share her success. "That's great, honey," he had said, but his enthusiasm sounded forced. "Really great." "Marcus, is everything okay? You sound, I don't know, distant." "I'm fine, just tired from work. You know how it is." But Ruby didn't know how it was anymore. Marcus's messages became increasingly infrequent and brief. When she asked about his day, he gave one-word answers. When she shared stories about her work or her fellow soldiers, he seemed disinterested. She began to worry that the distance was becoming permanent. "Maybe we should do counseling when I get back," she had suggested during one of their last video calls. "Deployment is hard on marriages. There's no shame in getting help." Marcus had looked uncomfortable. "We don't need counseling, Ruby. We just need to figure out how to be together again." Now, as Ruby sat in the military transport plane somewhere over the Atlantic, she replayed that conversation in her mind. Something in Marcus's tone had been off, but she couldn't put her finger on what. She pushed the worry aside and focused instead on her excitement about returning home. She had so much to tell him, so many plans to share. She had saved most of her deployment pay, and they could finally afford a down payment on a real house. Maybe it was time to start trying for kids. Ruby pulled out her phone and looked at the photo of Marcus she kept as her wallpaper. It had been taken on their wedding day. He was smiling broadly, his arm around her waist, both of them looking impossibly young and happy. She couldn't wait to see that smile again in person. The plane began its descent toward Fort Bragg, and Ruby's heart raced with anticipation. In a few hours, she would be home. She would surprise Marcus, maybe cook his favorite dinner, and they would begin the process of rebuilding their connection. She had learned so much about herself during this deployment, about her strength, her capabilities, her worth. She was excited to share that growth with the man she loved. As the wheels touched down on American soil, Ruby had no idea that the life she was returning to no longer existed, and that the man waiting at home was no longer the same person she had married.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The military bus from Fort Bragg dropped Ruby off at the corner of Pine Street and Maple Avenue at 3:47 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon. She shouldered her duffel bag and walked the 3 blocks to the house she had called home for the past 4 years, her heart pounding with excitement and nervous energy. The familiar neighborhood looked exactly the same. Mrs. Chen still had her elaborate Halloween decorations up, the Johnsons' fence still needed painting, and the old oak tree in the miller's yard had grown even taller. Ruby had deliberately not told Marcus exactly when she would arrive. She wanted to surprise him, maybe catch him off guard in the best possible way. She imagined his face lighting up when he saw her, the way he would drop whatever he was doing and sweep her into his arms. They would have the whole weekend to reconnect before she had to report to the base on Monday for her debrief and discharge processing. As she rounded the corner onto Oakwood Drive, their street came into view. The small ranch-style house with the blue shutters looked different somehow, though Ruby couldn't immediately put her finger on what had changed. The lawn was perfectly manicured, more perfect than Marcus had ever kept it before. New flower beds bordered the front walkway, planted with expensive-looking mums and ornamental kale. A brand-new BMW sedan sat in the driveway next to Marcus's pickup truck. Ruby's steps slowed. Marcus worked at Henderson's auto repair for $14 an hour. There was no way he could afford a BMW, even a used one. Maybe he was working on it for a customer, she rationalized, though it seemed odd for him to bring work home. She approached the front door and noticed more changes. The old brass knocker had been replaced with a modern brushed steel one. New ceramic planters flanked the entrance, filled with fall flowers she had never seen Marcus show any interest in. The front door itself had been painted a deep burgundy color, a far cry from the simple white it had been when she left. Ruby reached for her keys, then hesitated. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't articulate what. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But this was her home, her husband. She was just being paranoid after months of being hyper-vigilant in a combat zone. She inserted her key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Confused, she tried again, jiggling the key and pushing on the door. Nothing. The key that had worked perfectly for 4 years no longer fit the lock. A cold realization began to creep up her spine. Ruby walked around to the back of the house, her military-issued boots crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel path. The backyard, too, had been transformed. Where there had once been Marcus's motorcycling pieces and a small vegetable garden Ruby had started, there was now an elaborate patio set with a gas fire pit and string lights. The shed where Marcus kept his tools had been replaced with a modern storage building that looked like it cost more than Ruby made in 6 months. The back door was locked, too, and her key didn't work there either. Ruby pulled out her phone and called Marcus. The call went straight to voicemail, not his old message, but a new one in a voice she barely recognized. You've reached Marcus Williams. I'm not available right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. Marcus, it's me. I'm home and I'm standing in our backyard, but my keys don't work. Can you call me back right away? I'm really confused right now. She hung up and looked around the neighborhood, wondering if any of the neighbors were home. Mrs. Patterson across the street was in her garden, and Ruby waved. The older woman looked up, seemed to recognize her, and then quickly turned away and went inside her house. The interaction was so strange and abrupt that Ruby wondered if she had imagined it. 20 minutes passed with no return call from Marcus. Ruby tried the number again, and this time it went directly to a message saying the mailbox was full. She called Marcus's work number, but Henderson's auto repair was closed for the day. Growing increasingly anxious, Ruby decided to wait on the front porch. She sat on the steps, her duffel bag beside her, watching cars pass by and trying to make sense of what was happening. Neighbors she had known for years drove past without acknowledging her. The Hendersons' teenage son, Tommy, rode by on his bike, saw her, and then immediately turned around and pedaled quickly in the other direction. As the sun began to set, Ruby's confusion transformed into something approaching panic. She had deployed from this house 18 months ago. She had paid half the mortgage during that entire time through automatic military allotments. Her name was on the deed. This was legally her home. Yet she couldn't get inside, and her husband wasn't answering his phone.
At 6:30 p.m., the burgundy front door opened from the inside. Marcus stepped out, and Ruby's breath caught in her throat. He looked different. Not just older, but transformed. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His hair was styled in a way she had never seen before, and he was wearing clothes that were far more expensive than anything in his usual wardrobe. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, leather shoes that probably cost more than their monthly utility bill. "Ruby," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You're home." "Marcus!" She jumped up from the porch steps, instinctively moving toward him for a hug, but he stepped backward, holding up his hands. "We need to talk," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Of course we need to talk. I've been sitting here for 3 hours. My keys don't work, and you didn't return my calls. What is going on, and whose car is that in the driveway?" Marcus glanced back toward the house, and Ruby caught a glimpse of movement in the front window. Someone else was inside. "Marcus, who is in our house?" He ran his hands through his newly styled hair and looked anywhere but her face. "Ruby, things have changed while you were gone. I've changed." "Changed how? What are you talking about?" "I got promoted at work. Henderson made me shop manager. I'm making good money now, and I've been thinking about what I want out of life." Ruby felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Okay, that's great about the promotion. I'm happy for you. But why don't my keys work? And who's in the house?" "I had the locks changed for security reasons," Marcus said, not looking directly at her. "And there's someone I need you to meet." The front door opened again, and a woman emerged. She was Ruby's age, maybe a little younger, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of effortless elegance that Ruby had never mastered. She was wearing a flowing sundress that probably cost more than Ruby's entire wardrobe, and she moved with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. "Ruby, this is Stephanie," Marcus said. "Stephanie, this is my wife, Ruby." The word wife seemed to stick in his throat. "Ruby, Marcus has told me so much about you. Thank you for your service." Ruby stared at the woman's hand but didn't take it. "I'm sorry, who are you exactly? And why are you in my house?" "Stephanie is—" Marcus began, then stopped. "This is really complicated, Ruby." "No, it's not complicated at all. You're my husband. This is my house. I've been gone for 18 months serving my country, and I come home to find a stranger in my house and my keys don't work? Make it make sense. Right now, Marcus." Stephanie touched Marcus's arm possessively, and Ruby noticed the gesture immediately. This was not a casual acquaintance or friend. The way Stephanie stood next to Marcus, the familiarity of her touch, the expensive renovations to the house, pieces of a horrible puzzle were beginning to fall into place. "Maybe we should go inside and discuss this properly," Stephanie suggested, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I can't go inside," Ruby said, her voice rising slightly, "because apparently I don't live here anymore, even though I've been paying half the mortgage this entire time from Afghanistan." Marcus flinched at that. "Ruby, please don't make a scene. The neighbors—" "The neighbors? The neighbors who have been avoiding me all afternoon? The neighbors who have been watching you play house with another woman while your wife was deployed?"
"It's not like that," Marcus said weakly. "Then what is it like? Explain it to me, Marcus, because I'm really struggling to understand how I left for a deployment with a husband and a home, and I come back to find my keys don't work, and there's another woman wearing an expensive dress answering my front door." Ruby's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw a message from her friend Jessica, who lived 2 neighborhoods over. "Ruby, I heard you were back. I'm so sorry. I tried calling you but couldn't get through. Can we meet? There are things you need to know." The implications of that message hit Ruby like a physical blow. This wasn't a recent development. People knew. The neighbors knew. Her friends knew. While she had been saving lives in Afghanistan, thinking about her husband and planning their future together, her entire life had been unraveling, and everyone knew but her. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Ruby," Marcus started. "How long has this been going on?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority she had learned to project in high-stress medical situations. Marcus looked at Stephanie, who nodded encouragingly. "About a year,"
he admitted. A year. Ruby repeated the words, letting them sink in. So, while I was treating wounded soldiers and sleeping in a tent in 120-degree heat, you were renovating our house for your girlfriend. You don't understand the pressure I was under, Marcus said, finally showing some emotion. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who's never here, someone who's always gone, always putting the military first? I was serving my country. I was doing something meaningful, something that mattered. And what about what mattered to me? Marcus's voice rose to match hers. What about my needs? You left me alone for months at a time, and when you came back from Iraq, you were different. You were cold, controlling, always acting like you knew better than everyone else. Ruby stared at her husband, this man she no longer recognized. I was grown up, Marcus. I had seen things, done things, saved lives. I came back more confident, more sure of myself. I'm sorry if that threatened you. It didn't threaten me, Marcus said defensively. It just made me realize that maybe we wanted different things. Different things, like expensive cars and designer clothes, and women who don't challenge you. She gestured toward Stephanie, who was watching the exchange with poorly concealed satisfaction. Stephanie understands me. She supports my dreams. What dreams? Marcus, when I left, your biggest dream was saving enough money to buy a boat someday. What dreams are you talking about? Stephanie stepped forward slightly. Marcus has so much potential. He just needed someone who believed in him, who could help him see what he was capable of. Ruby looked at the woman more closely. Everything about her screamed money. Not just her clothes and accessories, but her teeth, her skin, her posture. This wasn't someone who worked at an auto repair shop or lived in a modest neighborhood. This was someone from a completely different social class. Let me guess, she said, pieces clicking into place. You're not from around here. You have money. Family money. Stephanie's smile faltered slightly. My family owns several businesses in Charlotte. I met Marcus when my car needed repairs at his shop. And you saw a good-looking guy who was unhappy with his deployed wife, and you decided to upgrade his life. It wasn't like that, Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Ruby pulled out her phone and called her friend Jessica. Jess, it's Ruby. I'm standing in front of my house with Marcus and his girlfriend. Can you pick me up? I need somewhere to stay tonight. I'm on my way, Jessica said immediately. Ruby, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. Ruby hung up and looked at Marcus and Stephanie, who were whispering to each other on the porch of what had been her house until a few hours ago. I have one question, she said. When exactly were you planning to tell me? Or were you hoping I'd get killed over there and save you the trouble of a divorce? Marcus looked genuinely shocked. Ruby, don't say that. I would never want anything to happen to you. But you were perfectly happy to let something happen to our marriage while I was dodging mortars in trying to save lives. A car pulled up to the curb and Jessica got out, her face full of sympathy and anger. Ruby had never been so grateful to see a friendly face. As she walked toward Jessica's car with her duffel bag, Ruby heard Stephanie say to Marcus, "That went better than expected." Ruby stopped walking. The casual cruelty of that comment, the implication that they had planned this confrontation, had discussed how it might go, hit her harder than anything else that had happened. She turned back toward the porch. Marcus, she called out, I want you to know that while you were planning how to break up with me, I was planning our future. I saved $15,000 from my deployment pay for a down payment on a house where we could start a family. I was ready to give you everything. She got in Jessica's car and didn't look back as they drove away, but she could feel Marcus watching her leave. What she couldn't see was the expression of regret that crossed his face, or the way Stephanie immediately began talking to him to distract him from that. As they drove through the familiar streets of her hometown, Ruby realized that her life as she had known it was over. Everything she had been working towards, everything she had believed in, had been an illusion. The man she loved had moved on without her, and everyone she thought she could count on had kept his secret. But even as her heart broke, Ruby felt something else stirring inside her, a cold, determined anger that she recognized from her combat training. She had survived 2 deployments in active war zones. She had saved lives under impossible circumstances. She was not going to let Marcus Williams and his rich girlfriend destroy her. The awakening was brutal, but it was complete. Ruby Smith was no longer the naive young woman who had left for Afghanistan 18 months ago. She was a combat veteran with skills, resources, and a newfound clarity about exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The real fight was just beginning.
Jessica's apartment was a modest two-bedroom place on the other side of town, decorated with the kind of mismatched furniture that screamed recent college graduate trying to make ends meet. But to Ruby, sitting on the worn couch with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, it felt like a sanctuary. Jessica had cleared out her spare room without question, bringing Ruby clean sheets and towels as if having a devastated friend show up on her doorstep was the most normal thing in the world. "How long have you known?" Ruby asked as Jessica sat down across from her, tucking her legs under herself in the familiar way she had since they were teenagers. Jessica sighed deeply. "I first heard rumors about 6 months ago. Linda Morrison from the grocery store mentioned seeing Marcus around town with some blonde woman. But you know how people gossip. I didn't want to believe it. But you found out for sure?" 3 months ago, I saw them together at Romano's, that expensive Italian place downtown. Jessica's voice was heavy with regret. "Ruby, they weren't just having dinner. They were intimate. Holding hands, feeding each other dessert, it was obvious they were together." Ruby felt her stomach clench. Romano's had been where Marcus had taken her for their first anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on her. "I tried to call you that night," Jessica continued, "but the time difference, and then I kept thinking maybe I was wrong, maybe there was an explanation. I wrote you probably 10 different emails and deleted them all. How do you tell your best friend that her husband is cheating while she's deployed in a war zone?" "You tell her the truth," Ruby said quietly. "I could have handled it, Jess. What I can't handle is feeling like an idiot who was the last to know." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ruby reached over and squeezed her friend's hand. "You were trying to protect me, I get it. But I need to know everything now. What else haven't people told me?" Jessica got up and retrieved a bottle of wine from her kitchen, pouring 2 generous glasses. "Marcus quit his job in Henderson's about 8 months ago. He's working at Stephanie's family dealership now, Williams BMW. Apparently, they gave him some kind of management position." "Williams BMW?" Ruby's mind raced. "The dealership is named after him?" "Not him. Her. Stephanie Williams. As in the Williams family that owns half the commercial real estate in Charlotte. Ruby, this woman isn't just rich. Her family owns that BMW dealership, 3 others, and a bunch of other businesses. We're talking old Southern money, like generational wealth." Ruby took a long sip of wine, processing this information. "So Marcus didn't just find a girlfriend. He found a meal ticket." "It gets worse," Jessica said reluctantly. "They're engaged." The wine glass slipped from Ruby's fingers, hitting the coffee table with a sharp crack. Red wine spread across the wooden surface, but neither woman moved to clean it up. "Engaged," Ruby repeated numbly. "But he's still married to me." "Linda Morrison, you remember her. She works at the courthouse now. She said they applied for a marriage license last week. Apparently, Marcus filed divorce papers 4 months ago, but since you were deployed, they couldn't serve you properly." Ruby's military training kicked in, her mind shifting into tactical mode. 4 months ago. So he was planning to divorce me before I even came home. "Ruby." "No, it's okay. I need to understand the timeline." Ruby stood up and began pacing Jessica's small living room, her movements sharp and purposeful. "He started the affair a year ago. He filed for divorce 4 months ago. That means for the last 8 months, he's been actively working to end our marriage while I was sending him love letters and planning our future." She stopped pacing and turned to face Jessica. "I need to see those divorce papers." "Ruby, maybe you should call a lawyer first." "I am going to call a lawyer, but first, I need to understand exactly what Marcus thinks he's going to get away with." Jessica opened her laptop and navigated to the county clerk's website. After a few minutes of searching, she found the filing. Here it is. Smith versus Williams, filed in September. Ruby read over Jessica's shoulder, her anger building with each line.
Marcus was seeking dissolution of their marriage on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. He was asking for half of all marital assets, including the house, Ruby's military savings, and her veterans' benefits. He was also seeking spousal support, claiming that Ruby's military career had prevented him from pursuing his own educational and career goals. "He wants alimony," Ruby said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He wants me to pay him alimony while he lives with his rich fiancée." "There's more," Jessica said, scrolling down. "He's claiming that your military service constituted abandonment of the marriage. He says that your deployments created an undue burden on him, that you prioritized your career over your marriage." Ruby stared at the screen, reading Marcus's claims that she had been emotionally unavailable, that her military service had fundamentally changed her personality, and that she had become controlling and dismissive of his needs and aspirations. According to the filing, Marcus had been forced to seek emotional support elsewhere due to Ruby's inability to maintain a traditional marriage relationship. "A traditional marriage relationship?" Ruby said, her voice thick with disgust. "I was in Afghanistan saving lives, and he wants to paint me as a bad wife because I wasn't home baking cookies?" Jessica closed the laptop. "Ruby, you need to fight this. This is complete garbage, and any decent lawyer will tear it apart." "Oh, I'm gonna fight it," Ruby said, her voice carrying a steel edge that Jessica had never heard before. "But first, I need to understand what I'm really dealing with." Ruby pulled out her phone and began making calls. Her first call was to her bank, where she learned that Marcus had been withdrawing money from their joint savings account for the past 6 months. Small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alerts, but which totaled nearly $8,000. Her second call was to her mortgage company, where she discovered that Marcus had stopped making payments 3 months ago, and the house was now in pre-foreclosure. "He stopped making the mortgage payments," Ruby told Jessica after hanging up, "but I've been sending him money every month to cover my half." "Where did that money go?"
Ruby's third call answered that question. Marcus had opened a separate bank account and had been depositing Ruby's contributions there without making house payments. He had essentially been stealing her money while allowing their home to go into foreclosure. "This is fraud," Jessica said when Ruby explained what she had learned. "He can't just take your money and not pay the bills." Ruby made one more call, to her parents in Georgia. Her father answered on the second ring. "Ruby, sweetheart, we weren't expecting you to call until tomorrow. How was the homecoming?" Ruby took a deep breath. "Dad, I need help. Marcus has been having an affair, he's trying to divorce me, and he's been stealing my money. I'm staying at Jessica's tonight, but I need advice." There was a long pause. When her father spoke again, his voice had the deadly calm that Ruby remembered from her childhood when he was truly angry. "Tell me everything." Ruby spent the next hour walking her parents through the entire situation. Her father, a retired Army sergeant who had spent 30 years dealing with military legal issues, asked detailed questions about timelines, finances, and legal documents. Her mother, a retired school principal with a sharp mind for details, took notes and asked about documentation. "Here's what you're going to do," her father said finally. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to find the best divorce attorney in Charlotte. Not Fayetteville, Charlotte, where the real money and power is. You're going to take every piece of documentation you have, and you're going to file a countersuit. This boy has made several serious mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "First, he filed in North Carolina, which is an equitable distribution state. That means the court will consider his adultery when dividing assets. Second, he's been stealing your military pay, which is a federal crime. Third, he's trying to claim abandonment when you were deployed serving your country. No judge in North Carolina is going to look kindly on that." Ruby felt the first spark of hope she had had since arriving home. "So I have options." "Honey, you don't just have options. You have weapons. And from what you've told me about this Stephanie Williams woman and her family money, I suspect they don't want this to get messy in public." Her mother's voice came through the speaker.
Ruby, are you okay financially right now? Do you need us to help with attorney fees? I have money, Mom. I saved almost everything from my deployment. I just need to make sure Marcus can't get his hands on it. First thing tomorrow, before you do anything else, you go to the bank and you close that joint account. You open a new account in your name only and you transfer every penny. You document everything, every withdrawal he made, every deposit you made. You're going to need that for court. After hanging up with her parents, Ruby felt something shift inside her. The devastation and heartbreak were still there, but they were now accompanied by something else. A cold, strategic anger that reminded her of how she felt before a difficult surgery. She had a mission now, and she knew exactly how to accomplish it. Jessica, I need to borrow your laptop. I have some research to do. Ruby spent the next 3 hours learning everything she could about Stephanie Williams and her family. The Williams family had built their fortune in automotive dealerships and commercial real estate, but they were also prominent in Charlotte society. Stephanie's father, Robert Williams, served on the boards of several charities and had been featured in Charlotte magazine as one of the city's most eligible bachelors after his wife died 5 years ago. Stephanie herself had a psychology degree from Duke University, but had never worked a traditional job. Instead, she spent her time organizing charity events and serving on the boards of various nonprofit organizations. Her social media presence was carefully curated. Lots of photos at expensive restaurants, charity galas, and exotic vacation destinations. She's never had to work for anything in her life, Ruby murmured as she scrolled through Instagram photos of Stephanie at a fundraiser for wounded veterans, the irony of which wasn't lost on Ruby. But the more Ruby researched, the more she understood what she was really dealing with. This wasn't just about Marcus's infidelity. This was about a wealthy woman who was used to getting whatever she wanted and who had decided she wanted Ruby's husband. The renovations to the house, the expensive clothes, the new car, Stephanie had been systematically upgrading Marcus's life to make him dependent on her. She bought him, Ruby said to Jessica, who had fallen asleep on the other end of the couch. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight for her life. Not just her marriage, but her dignity, her financial security, and her future. Marcus and Stephanie thought they were dealing with a heartbroken military wife who would just quietly accept whatever settlement they offered. They had no idea what Ruby Smith was capable of when she set her mind to something. Ruby had led medical teams under enemy fire. She had made life and death decisions while mortars exploded around her. She had saved the lives of soldiers who were barely older than teenagers, working with steady hands while chaos erupted all around her. Marcus Williams and his rich girlfriend were about to learn that they had picked a fight with the wrong woman. As Ruby finally drifted off to sleep on Jessica's couch, her last conscious thought was of the expression on Stephanie's face when she had said, "That went better than expected." They thought they had won. They thought Ruby would simply disappear, take whatever crumbs they offered, and let them live happily ever after with the life they had stolen from her. Tomorrow, Ruby would show them exactly how wrong they were. The devastated wife who had arrived on Jessica's doorstep was gone. In her place was a combat veteran with a mission, and Ruby Smith had never failed a mission in her life. She wasn't about to start now.
Ruby woke up before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of military service. Jessica's apartment was still dark and quiet, but Ruby's mind was already racing with the day's mission objectives. She made coffee quietly and sat at the small kitchen table, creating a detailed action plan in a notebook she'd found in Jessica's junk drawer. By 8 a.m., she was standing outside First National Bank when they opened their doors. The teller, a middle-aged woman named Carol, who had handled Ruby's banking for years, smiled warmly until she saw the expression on Ruby's face. "I need to close my joint account with Marcus Williams and open a new individual account," Ruby said, sliding her military ID and bank card across the counter. Carol's smile faltered. "Oh, Mrs. Smith, Well, there might be a problem with that." "What kind of problem?" "Your husband was here yesterday afternoon. He withdrew the remaining balance and closed the account." Ruby felt the blood drain from her face. "He withdrew everything? How much was in there?" Carol checked her computer screen and winced. $12,437. He said you had authorized the withdrawal for a family emergency. He stole $12,000, Ruby said, her voice carrying across the small bank branch. That was my deployment money, my savings. Mrs. Smith, perhaps we should speak in the manager's office, Carol suggested, glancing nervously at the other customers who were beginning to stare. In the manager's office, Ruby learned the devastating extent of Marcus's financial sabotage. Not only had he emptied their joint savings, but he had also applied and received a credit card in both their names 3 weeks earlier. The card already had a balance of $8,000, charges from expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, and what appeared to be a weekend trip to Myrtle Beach. I was in Afghanistan 3 weeks ago, Ruby told a manager, a nervous man named Steve Peterson. I couldn't have authorized any of this. The application shows your social security number and has what appears to be your signature, Peterson said, showing her the paperwork. Ruby studied the signature. It was a decent forgery, but she could see the differences. Marcus had obviously practiced copying her signature, probably using old checks or documents from their house. This is identity theft, Ruby said. I want to file a fraud report immediately. Mrs. Smith, since you're married, joint applications for credit are typically considered valid unless there's a specific power of attorney restriction. I was deployed overseas. I couldn't have signed anything in person. Check your security cameras from 3 weeks ago. I guarantee you I wasn't here. Peterson looked uncomfortable. We'll need to investigate this, but in the meantime, you're still legally responsible for the debt. Ruby left the bank with a fraud report number, a temporary account with the $63 she had in cash, and a growing understanding of how thoroughly Marcus had planned his betrayal. He hadn't just stolen her money, he had systematically destroyed her financial stability. Her next stop was the office of Margaret Chen, the divorce attorney her father had recommended. Chen had a reputation as one of Charlotte's most aggressive family law practitioners, and her downtown office reflected her success. Ruby waited in a reception area decorated with awards and testimonials while Chen finished with another client. Mrs. Smith, Chen said when she finally emerged from her office, your father spoke very highly of you when he called this morning. Let's discuss your situation. For the next 2 hours, Ruby laid out everything she had discovered. Chen took detailed notes, occasionally asking sharp questions that showed she understood exactly what they were dealing with. Your husband has made several critical errors, Chen said finally. The financial fraud alone gives us significant leverage. But I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly before it gets better. What do you mean? The Williams family doesn't like to lose, and they have resources. They'll try to paint you as an unstable veteran who abandoned her marriage for military glory. They'll claim you're suffering from PTSD, that you're violent and unpredictable. They'll use every stereotype about female combat veterans against you. Ruby felt a chill run down her spine. Can they? They can try. That's why we need to be prepared. I'm going to need your complete military record, medical records, fitness reports, and testimony from your commanding officers. We're going to prove that you're not only stable and competent, but that your military service makes you more qualified to handle finances and make responsible decisions, not less. Chen's assistant brought in a thick stack of paperwork. This is what your husband filed, Chen said. It's even worse than what you found online. Ruby read through Marcus's detailed accusations with growing disbelief. According to his filing, Ruby had become increasingly aggressive and militaristic after her first deployment. He claimed she had threatened him with violence during arguments and had expressed contempt for civilian life and relationships. The filing painted a picture of a woman who had been corrupted by military service and had returned home as a dangerous stranger. None of this is true, Ruby said, her voice shaking with anger. Of course it's not, but proving that in court will require documentation and witnesses. In the meantime, we need to address the immediate issues. The house is in foreclosure, which means we need to act quickly if you want to save it. I can't afford the mortgage payments on my own. Actually, you might be able to. If we can prove Marcus stole your money and forged your signature, we can force him to repay those funds. Plus, if you're awarded the house in the divorce, you can refinance based on your military income and benefits. Chen walked Ruby through the legal strategy. They would file a countersuit alleging fraud, identity theft, and adultery. They would seek not only to protect Ruby's assets, but to recover the money Marcus had stolen. Most importantly, they would demand immediate financial disclosure from both Marcus and Stephanie. The Williams family wouldn't want us scrutinized on a divorce proceeding, Chen explained.
If Stephanie has been supporting Marcus or paying for his lifestyle upgrades, that could constitute financial interference in a marriage, which gives us additional grounds for damages.
Ruby left Chen's office feeling cautiously optimistic, but her confidence was shaken by her next encounter. She had driven to Henderson's Auto Repair to speak with Marcus's former boss, hoping to get documentation of when he had quit and under what circumstances. Bill Henderson, a gruff man in his 60s who had known Ruby since she was a teenager, greeted her with obvious discomfort. "Ruby, I heard you were back. How was everything over there?" "It was fine, Mr. Henderson. I need to ask you about Marcus. When exactly did he quit?" Henderson shifted his weight from foot to foot, not meeting her eyes. "Look, Ruby, I don't want to get involved in whatever's going on between you two." "I'm not asking you to get involved. I just need employment records for legal purposes." "Marcus was a good worker," Henderson said carefully, "but he got a better opportunity and I couldn't match what they were offering him." Ruby studied the older man's face. There was something he wasn't telling her. "Mr. Henderson, what really happened? I've known you my whole life. Please, just tell me the truth." Henderson sighed heavily. "Marcus started taking a lot of time off about a year ago, said he had to run errands, help a friend, that kind of thing. But customers started complaining about work not getting done, and I had to talk to him about it several times." "What kind of errands?" "I don't know for sure, but he was always dressed up nice when he came back, and he started getting expensive haircuts, driving different cars. Look, Ruby, I'm not stupid. I figured out he was seeing someone, but it wasn't my business as long as he did his job." "But he wasn't doing his job." Henderson looked genuinely pained. The final straw was when Mrs. Rodriguez brought her car in for a brake repair and Marcus forgot to finish the work. She could have been killed if she hadn't noticed the problem before driving on the highway. I had to let him go. Ruby felt sick. "So he didn't quit for a better opportunity. You fired him." "I gave him the option to resign. Figured it would look better for him. But Ruby, I want you to know, whatever's going on now, Marcus wasn't always like this. Something changed in him this past year. It was like he became a different person." As Ruby drove away from Henderson's shop, she realized that Marcus's transformation had been even more complete than she had understood. He hadn't just found a rich girlfriend. He had abandoned his work ethic, his responsibility, and his integrity. Stephanie hadn't just bought him, she had corrupted him. Her phone rang as she pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store. It was Jessica. "Ruby, you need to know something. Marcus and Stephanie are at Romano's right now, and they're not alone. They're with a man in a suit who looks like a lawyer." "Are you sure?" "I'm having lunch with my sister 2 tables away from them. They've been here for an hour, and they keep looking at papers and talking in hushed voices. Ruby, I think they're planning something." Ruby's military instincts kicked in. If Marcus and Stephanie were meeting with a lawyer, they were either developing strategy or preparing to escalate their attack. Either way, Ruby needed to know what they were planning. "Can you hear anything they're saying?" "Not much, but I heard the lawyer mention something about psychological evaluation and military fitness assessment. Ruby, I think they're trying to have you declared mentally incompetent." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. If Marcus could prove that Ruby was psychologically unstable due to her military service, he could potentially have her declared unfit to handle her own affairs. That would give him control over her military benefits, her savings, and any legal decisions regarding their divorce. "Jess, I need you to try to get a photo of the lawyer if you can. I need to know who he is." "Already done. I'll text it to you." Ruby sat in her car staring at the photo Jessica had sent. The lawyer was someone she didn't recognize, but his expensive suit and confident demeanor suggested he was exactly the kind of high-powered attorney the Williams family could afford. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ruby, this is Stephanie. We need to talk. There are things about Marcus you don't know. Meet me at Starbucks on 5th Street at 4 p.m. Come alone." Ruby stared at the message, her mind racing. This could be a trap, an attempt to manipulate her, or a chance to gather intelligence about what Marcus and Stephanie were really planning. Her military training told her to be cautious, but her instincts told her this might be an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss.
She called Margaret Chen and explained the situation. "Don't go," Chen said immediately. "This is obviously an attempt to manipulate you or gather information they can use against you in court. But what if Stephanie knows something about Marcus that could help our case? What if she's having second thoughts?" "Ruby, people like Stephanie Williams don't have second thoughts about anything. They have strategies. If she wants to meet with you, it's because she thinks it will benefit her somehow." But as Ruby sat in the grocery store parking lot, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, she realized that playing it safe wasn't going to be enough. Marcus and Stephanie had the advantage of money, social connections, and a legal system that often favored traditional family structures over military service members. If Ruby was going to win this fight, she couldn't just react to their moves. She needed to make some bold moves of her own. At 3:45 p.m., Ruby walked into the Starbucks on 5th Street. Stephanie was already there, sitting in a corner booth, wearing another expensive outfit that probably cost more than Ruby made in a month. But something was different about her today. She looked nervous, almost fragile, without the confident smile she'd worn the day before. "Thank you for coming," Stephanie said as Ruby sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here," Ruby said simply. "What do you want to tell me about Marcus?" She looked around the coffee shop nervously, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "He's not who you think he is, Ruby, and he's not who I thought he was either."
Ruby studied Stephanie's face across the small coffee shop table, looking for signs of deception. In Afghanistan, reading people quickly and accurately had been a matter of life and death, and those skills served her well now. Stephanie's nervous energy seemed genuine. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, and she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. "What do you mean he's not who I think he is?" Ruby asked, keeping her voice neutral and calm. Stephanie took a shaky breath. "Marcus told me your marriage was over long before your deployment. He said you two had been living like roommates, that you were cold and distant, that you had already discussed divorce." "That's a lie." I know that now." Stephanie's voice was barely above a whisper. "Last night, after you left, I found some things in his dresser. Letters you wrote him from Afghanistan. Ruby, they weren't the letters of a woman who wanted a divorce. They were beautiful, full of love and plans for your future together." Ruby felt her chest tighten. She had poured her heart into those letters, writing them by candlelight in her tent after 18-hour shifts in the field hospital. "He kept them?" "All of them, tied with a ribbon in the back of his sock drawer." She pulled out her phone and showed Ruby a photo she had taken. It was indeed Ruby's handwriting, her personal stationery visible in the image. "This one is from 6 months ago. You wrote about wanting to start a family when you got home, about the house you wanted to buy together." Ruby stared at the photo, remembering the night she had written that particular letter. She had just finished treating a soldier who reminded her of Marcus, young, sandy-haired, with the same crooked smile. The experience had made her homesick and filled with love for the life she was planning to return to. "Why are you showing me this?" Ruby asked. "Because I need you to know that I'm not a monster," Stephanie said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "When I met Marcus, he told me he was separated, that your wife was career military and didn't want the same things he wanted. He made it sound like you had both moved on." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him." Stephanie wiped her eyes with a napkin. "Ruby, I'm 34 years old, and I've never had a serious relationship that wasn't about my family's money. When I met Marcus, he seemed different. He was working with his hands, he was down to earth. He didn't know anything about my family's wealth when we first started talking." Ruby listened, trying to reconcile this vulnerable woman with the confident figure who had answered her front door the day before. "My father died when I was 12. My mother remarried twice, both times to men who were obviously after our money. I've been propositioned by more fortune hunters than I can count. When Marcus showed interest in me before he knew who I was, it felt real for the first time in my life." "So you decided to steal my husband?" "I thought he was already lost to you."
Marcus told me you were both just going through the motions until your enlistment was up. He said you had grown apart, that military life had changed you into someone he didn't recognize. Ruby absorbed this information, understanding now how Marcus had manipulated both women. When did you find out he was lying? Pieces started to come together over the past few weeks, small things that didn't add up. He would get emotional when certain songs came on the radio, songs that turned out to be from your wedding playlist. He had photos of you hidden in his wallet that he thought I hadn't seen. And yesterday, when you showed up... What about yesterday? The way he looked at you, even while he was breaking your heart, I could see that he still loved you. And I realized that everything he had told me about your marriage was a lie. Ruby leaned back in her chair, processing this revelation. If you know he lied to you, why are you still with him? Why were you meeting with lawyers this afternoon? You know about that? I know you're trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. I know you're planning to use my military service against me. That's not my plan, Stephanie said urgently. That's Marcus's plan, and my family's lawyers. Ruby, you have to understand, once my family gets involved in something, they don't like to lose. When Marcus told them about the divorce, they saw it as a business transaction that needed to be handled efficiently. What does that mean? It means they've decided that the quickest way to resolve this situation is to discredit you completely. They want to paint you as an unstable veteran who can't handle civilian life, who abandoned her marriage for military glory, and who shouldn't be trusted with financial decisions. Ruby felt ice forming in her stomach. And you're going along with this? I was, until I found those letters. Ruby, I came here to warn you because what they're planning is going to destroy you. My family's lawyers aren't just going to argue that you're unstable. They're going to try to prove it. How? Stephanie pulled a folder from her purse and slid it across the table. They've hired a private investigator to dig into your military service. They're looking for any incidents, any complaints, any indication that you might have PTSD or anger management issues. Ruby opened the folder and found copies of requests for her military records, medical files, and fitness reports. Someone had also compiled a list of her fellow soldiers and commanding officers, presumably to interview them about her mental state and behavior. This is illegal. They can't access my military records without my permission. They're trying to get a court order based on Marcus's claims about your behavior. They want to force you to undergo a psychological evaluation, and they've already selected the psychiatrist, someone who has a history of diagnosing PTSD in female veterans.
Ruby studied the paperwork, her military mind automatically analyzing the threat assessment. This wasn't just a divorce proceeding. It was a coordinated attack designed to destroy her credibility and her future. There's more, Stephanie said. They want to have you declared financially incompetent so that Marcus can claim control over your military benefits and any disability payments you might be entitled to. If they succeed, you could lose everything, your savings, your benefits, even your right to make your own medical decisions. Why are you telling me this? What do you get out of warming me? Stephanie was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. Have you ever done something that you knew was wrong, but you convinced yourself it was okay because you wanted it so badly? Ruby thought about the moral compromises she had witnessed in Afghanistan. Good people making questionable decisions under extreme pressure. Yes, that's what I did with Marcus. I knew he was married, but I convinced myself that if his marriage was really over, it wasn't wrong to pursue him. I told myself that if you truly loved him, you wouldn't have chosen military service over staying home with him. So what changed? Reading your letters changed everything. You didn't choose military service over Marcus, Ruby. You chose to serve your country while maintaining your love for your husband. You were trying to build a better life for both of you, and he betrayed you while you were risking your life for others. Stephanie reached across the table and touched Ruby's hand. I can't undo what I've done, but I can't let my family destroy you for my mistakes. You deserve better than that. Ruby looked at this woman who had unknowingly helped to dismantle her life and felt an unexpected surge of sympathy.
Stephanie had been manipulated too, just in a different way. "What exactly are you proposing?" Ruby asked. "I can get you copies of everything my family's lawyers are planning. I can tell you which witnesses they're going to call, what arguments they're going to make, what evidence they think they have against you. I can give you the intelligence you need to fight back. And in return, I want you to know that I'm not your enemy. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but I'm not a malicious person. And I want Marcus to face the consequences of his lies without destroying an innocent person in the process." Ruby considered the offer. Military strategy had taught her that intelligence was often more valuable than firepower, and Stephanie was offering her access to the enemy's battle plans. But accepting help from her husband's mistress felt like a betrayal of her own dignity. "I need to think about this," Ruby said. "I understand. But Ruby, you need to know that they're moving fast. The court hearing for the psychological evaluation is scheduled for next Friday. That's less than a week." Ruby felt the timeline compressing around her like a vice. A week wasn't enough time to mount a proper defense through normal legal channels, especially against opponents with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. "If I were to accept your help," Ruby said carefully, "what would you need from me?" "Nothing," Stephanie said. "I don't want anything from you, except maybe the chance to earn some small measure of forgiveness someday. What I did was unforgivable, but maybe I can do something right now." Ruby's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret Chen. "Emergency meeting needed. Marcus's lawyers have filed for expedited hearing. Call me immediately." "I have to go," Ruby said, standing up. "Ruby, wait!" Stephanie pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. "This is my private number. Call me tonight if you decide you want my help. The meeting with the lawyers is at my father's office tomorrow at 9 a.m. I can record it and get you the audio file." Ruby took the card and looked at Stephanie one more time. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you have no reason to, and I'm asking you to anyway. Because sometimes the only way to fix a terrible mistake is to risk making it worse by trying to make it right." As Ruby walked out of the coffee shop, her mind was reeling with new possibilities and new dangers. Stephanie's offer could be a trap, a way to gather information about Ruby's legal strategy or to manipulate her into making mistakes. But it could also be exactly what it appeared to be, a genuine attempt at redemption from a woman who had realized the full scope of the damage she had helped to cause. Ruby drove to Margaret Chen's office, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she could mount an effective defense against an opponent who was willing to use unlimited resources to destroy her reputation and her future. But for the first time since arriving home, Ruby felt like she might have a real chance. Not because the odds had improved, but because she finally understood the full scope of what she was fighting. Marcus and the Williams family thought they were dealing with a broken-hearted military wife who would crumble under pressure. They were about to learn that Ruby Smith had spent 2 deployments making life-and-death decisions under fire. A coordinated legal attack, no matter how well-funded, was just another battlefield, and Ruby had never lost a battle that mattered. The question now was whether she could win a war.
Margaret Chen's office was buzzing with activity when Ruby arrived. 3 paralegals were hunched over computers, and Chen herself was on the phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that suggested she was coordinating some kind of legal counteroffensive. "Ruby, thank God you're here," Chen said after hanging up. "We have a situation, but we also have opportunities. Sit down." Chen spread several documents across her conference table like a general planning a military campaign. "Marcus's legal team filed motions this afternoon for an expedited hearing, emergency financial injunctions, and a court-ordered psychological evaluation. They're trying to steamroll us with paperwork and deadlines." "Stephanie warned me about this," Ruby said, then immediately regretted revealing her source. Chen raised an eyebrow. "You spoke with Stephanie Williams?" "Ruby, I specifically advised you not to." "She contacted me, said she had information I needed to know." Ruby pulled out the folder Stephanie had given her. "And she was right." Chen examined the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is their entire strategy." "Ruby,
Do you understand what you've been handed here? Intelligence on the enemy's battle plan. Exactly. But more than that, this shows they're overconfident. They're revealing their entire hand because they assume you don't have the resources or sophistication to counter their moves. Chen looked up from the papers. They've made a critical error in judgment. Over the next hour, Chen walked Ruby through the legal landscape. Marcus's team was indeed trying to fast-track everything, hoping to overwhelm Ruby with simultaneous legal challenges that would drain her resources and force her to accept an unfavorable settlement. But here's what they don't know, Chen said with satisfaction. I've been building our counter-strategy since this morning, and I've called in some favors. Chen introduced Ruby to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic psychologist who specialized in military veterans' legal cases. Dr. Martinez had reviewed Ruby's military records and was prepared to testify about the psychological profiles of successful combat medics. Ruby, your military fitness reports are exceptional. You've been consistently rated as having superior judgment under pressure, excellent leadership capabilities, and outstanding emotional stability. Any attempt to portray you as psychologically unfit would require them to discredit the evaluations of multiple superior officers. Can they do that? They can try, but it would mean arguing that the entire military evaluation system is flawed. That's not a position any judge wants to hear, especially in North Carolina, where military service is highly respected. Chen's second surprise was Detective Ray Morrison from the Charlotte Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Morrison had been investigating identity theft cases involving military personnel and was very interested in Marcus's fraudulent credit card applications. Mrs. Smith, what your husband did constitutes multiple felonies: identity theft, wire fraud, and potentially conspiracy if we can prove his girlfriend was involved in planning these crimes. What kind of evidence would you need? Bank records, credit applications, security footage from the institutions where the crimes occurred. But most importantly, we need to establish a pattern of deception that shows this was premeditated rather than a simple misunderstanding between spouses. Ruby thought about Stephanie's offer to record the Williams family strategy meeting. What if I could get you audio recordings of them discussing their plans? Morrison leaned forward with interest. That could be invaluable depending on what's said. If they admit to any knowledge of the financial fraud, or if they discuss plans to manufacture evidence against you, that becomes conspiracy to commit fraud. Chen held up a hand. Ruby, I need to ask you directly, how exactly are you planning to obtain these recordings? Ruby explained Stephanie's offer, watching Chen's expression carefully. To her surprise, the attorney didn't immediately object. It's risky, Chen said finally. If Stephanie is working with you voluntarily and she's recording conversations she's legitimately part of, then the recordings could be admissible. But if this is a setup, it could destroy our case. I don't think it's a setup. She seemed genuinely remorseful, and she showed me things that proved Marcus had been lying to her too. Dr. Martinez spoke up. From a psychological perspective, Stephanie's behavior is consistent with someone experiencing genuine guilt and regret. The fact that she sought you out rather than you approaching her suggests her motivations might be authentic. Chen made her decision. Here's what we're going to do. Ruby, you're going to call Stephanie and accept her offer, but we're going to be very careful about how we handle whatever information she provides. That evening, Ruby sat in Jessica's apartment, staring at Stephanie's business card. The smart, safe thing to do would be to ignore Stephanie's offer and fight this battle through traditional legal channels. But Ruby had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes the smart, safe choice wasn't the winning choice. She dialed the number. Ruby? Stephanie answered on the first ring. I wasn't sure you'd call. I'm calling. What exactly are you proposing? The meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Williams & Associates. That's my family's business management office. Marcus will be there with the lawyers, along with my father and his advisors. They're planning to finalize their strategy for destroying your credibility. And you can record this? I can, but I need to be honest with you about the risks. If they find out I'm working against them, my father will cut me off completely. He's done it before to family members who crossed him. Ruby was surprised by this admission. You're willing to risk your inheritance for this? Ruby, I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. What I don't have is the ability to live with myself if I let them destroy an innocent person to cover up my mistakes. They agreed to meet at a diner near the Williams office building the next morning. Stephanie would go to the meeting with a recording device. Then immediately afterwards, she would provide Ruby with the audio file and any documents she could safely copy. "There's one more thing," Stephanie said before hanging up. "Marcus has been staying at my apartment since you came home. Last night, he was going through boxes of your things from the house, and he was crying. I think he's starting to realize what he really lost."
Ruby hung up feeling conflicted. Part of her wanted to hear that Marcus was suffering, that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal. But another part of her, the part that had loved him for 6 years, felt sad that things had come to this point. The next morning, Ruby met Stephanie at Mel's Diner, a greasy spoon restaurant that had been serving Charlotte's working class for 40 years. Stephanie looked completely out of place in her designer clothes, but her hands were steady as she showed Ruby a small recording device hidden in her purse. "I've tested it twice," Stephanie said. "The audio quality is excellent, and it has a 4-hour battery life." "Are you sure about this? Once you do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure." Stephanie looked out the window toward the glass office building where her family conducted their business. "Ruby, there's something else you should know. My father isn't just trying to help Marcus win this divorce. He sees you as a threat to the family's reputation." "What do you mean?" "The Williams name is important in Charlotte society. We sit on charity boards, we donate to political campaigns, we're involved in all the right causes. Having a family member involved in a messy divorce with a decorated war veteran doesn't fit the image my father has spent decades building." Ruby began to understand the broader stakes. So this isn't just about money or property, it's about protecting the Williams family brand. Exactly. And that means they'll go to any length to make sure you are not seen as the victim in this situation. They need you to be the villain, the unstable veteran who couldn't handle civilian life and drove her husband into the arms of another woman. "But I'm not unstable." "I know that. You know that. But if they can convince a judge that you are, then Marcus becomes the victim, I become the savior who helped him escape an abusive marriage, and the Williams family looks like heroes for supporting true love against military dysfunction." Ruby felt a chill as she realized how thoroughly her opponents had thought this through. They weren't just trying to win a divorce case, they were trying to rewrite the entire narrative of what had happened. "Go. Get me that recording." For the next 3 hours, Ruby sat in Jessica's car in the diner parking lot, watching the Williams office building and waiting for her phone to ring. She used the time to call her parents and update them on the situation. "Honey, I'm proud of you for taking this risk. Sometimes you have to use unconventional tactics to win a conventional war. What if it backfires?" "Then you'll adapt and overcome, just like you did in Afghanistan. Ruby, you've handled situations where people's lives depended on your judgment. This is just another mission." At 12:30 p.m., Ruby's phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Got everything. Meet me at the parking garage across from the office building. Level 3, northeast corner." Ruby drove to the garage and found Stephanie waiting by her BMW, looking shaken but determined. She handed Ruby a USB drive and a folder of photocopied documents. "It's all there." "Ruby, what they're planning is worse than I thought." "What do you mean?" "They're not just going to argue that you're psychologically unfit. They've hired a private investigator who claims he can prove you had an affair with a fellow soldier in Afghanistan. They're going to paint you as an adulterous wife who abandoned her marriage for military adventure and extramarital relationships." "That's completely false. I know it's false. But they have photos of you with a male soldier, and they're going to claim the body language and proximity suggest an intimate relationship." Ruby thought frantically, trying to remember any photographs that could be misinterpreted. Then it hit her. "Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson. He was my commanding officer. We worked closely together in the medical hospital, and there were probably dozens of photos of us during medical procedures and briefings."
That's probably it. On the recording, they talk about hiring an expert to analyze the photos and testify about intimate body language indicators between you and this Peterson. This is insane. They're going to destroy my reputation with manufactured evidence and paid expert testimony. There's more, Stephanie said grimly. They've also found out about your savings account, the $15,000 you mentioned. They're claiming that money came from selling military supplies on the black market and that you're hiding additional income from illegal activities. Ruby leaned against the concrete wall of the parking garage, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the attack being mounted against her. These people weren't just trying to win a legal case, they were trying to destroy every aspect of her character and reputation. But here's the thing, Stephanie continued. I recorded everything, and in their confidence, they admitted to several things that could destroy their case. Marcus admitted that he forged your signature on the credit card applications. My father's lawyer talked about fabricating evidence to support the adultery claims, and they discussed bribing witnesses to testify against your character. Ruby looked up sharply. They admitted to planning to fabricate evidence? It's all on the recording. Ruby, they've just handed you everything you need not only to win this case, but to potentially have them all charged with criminal conspiracy. For the first time since coming home, Ruby felt like she had the upper hand. Her opponents had been so confident in their wealth and power that they had confessed to multiple crimes while planning her destruction. There's one more thing, Stephanie said. Marcus asked them to make sure you could never serve in the military again. He wants your security clearance revoked and your military record permanently damaged so that you can't rebuild your life through continued service. That revelation hit Ruby harder than anything else. Marcus wasn't just trying to take her money and her home, he was trying to take away her identity, her career, and her ability to serve the country she loved. But as Ruby drove back to Jessica's apartment with the USB drive and documents, Ruby realized that Marcus and the Williams family had made a fatal error. They had revealed their entire strategy, confessed to multiple crimes, and shown the true extent of their cruelty and corruption. Ruby Smith had spent 2 deployments fighting enemies who used improvised explosive devices, sniper attacks, and psychological warfare. Compared to that, a family of wealthy criminals and her lying ex-husband were just another tactical problem to be solved. And Ruby had never met a tactical problem she couldn't solve.
The Charlotte family court was packed on Friday morning when Ruby walked through the doors with Margaret Chen and her team. Word had somehow leaked about the case, and local media had picked up on the story of a decorated combat veteran facing off against one of Charlotte's most prominent families. Ruby wore her dress blue uniform, a calculated decision by Chen to remind everyone in the courtroom exactly who they were dealing with. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 expensive lawyers, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than he used to make in 2 months. He couldn't meet Ruby's eyes as she took her seat. Stephanie sat in the gallery behind him, her face a mask of composed determination. Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to Stephanie's family despite the name, called the court to order. She was a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense and focusing on facts. I've reviewed the motions from both parties, Judge Williams began, and I have to say this is one of the most complex divorce cases I've seen in 20 years on the bench. Mr. Patterson, you may present your opening arguments. Marcus's lead attorney, Richard Patterson, stood and launched into a carefully crafted narrative about a marriage destroyed by military service. He painted Ruby as a woman who had chosen career over family, who had returned from deployments as a changed person, cold and controlling. He spoke about Marcus's struggle to maintain their home while his wife pursued military glory overseas.
Your Honor, Mr. Williams has documented evidence of his wife's increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior following her military service. We believe she suffers from undiagnosed PTSD that has made her unfit to make financial decisions or maintain a stable relationship. Ruby listened to Patterson systematically dismantle her character and reputation, feeling her anger build, but keeping her expression neutral. This was exactly what Stephanie's recording had prepared her for. Margaret Chen stood for the defense. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of military-induced instability, but rather a calculated campaign of fraud, identity theft, and character assassination designed to cover up adultery and financial crimes. Chen methodically laid out the evidence of Marcus's deception. The forged credit card applications, the stolen money, the secret relationship that had been going on for over a year. She introduced Dr. Martinez's evaluation of Ruby's military fitness reports and psychological stability. But the real bombshell came when Chen announced her final piece of evidence. Your Honor, the defense has obtained audio recordings of the plaintiff and his associates planning to fabricate evidence, suborn perjury, and commit fraud against this court. Patterson jumped to his feet. Objection! Your Honor, these alleged recordings were obtained illegally and without consent. Not true, Chen replied calmly. These recordings were made by Miss Stephanie Williams, who was present at the meeting in question and consented to recording conversations in which she was a participant. The recordings are completely legal under North Carolina law. Judge Williams reviewed the legal precedents Chen had cited, then ruled that the recordings were admissible. I'll hear them in my chambers first to determine their relevance. During the recess, Ruby watched as panic spread through Marcus's legal team. Patterson was on his phone, presumably with the Williams family lawyers, his voice rising in obvious frustration. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. Stephanie approached Ruby during the break. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm grateful you gave me the chance to do the right thing. What will happen to you after this? Ruby asked. My father will probably disown me. The family will close ranks and pretend I never existed. But I have my own money, and I have something more valuable. I can live with myself again. When court reconvened, Judge Williams's expression was thunderous. I have listened to these recordings, and I am appalled by what I've heard. Mr. Patterson, your clients have confessed on tape to planning multiple felonies in connection with this case. The judge played select portions of the recordings for the courtroom. Marcus's voice admitting to forging Ruby's signature, Robert Williams discussing how to fabricate evidence of adultery, the family's lawyers talking about bribing witnesses and destroying Ruby's military career. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I am ordering that copies of these recordings be turned over to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Patterson made a desperate attempt to salvage his case. Your Honor, these recordings don't change the fundamental facts about Mrs. Smith's psychological state and her abandonment of the marriage through military service. Mr. Patterson, I am a Navy veteran myself, and I find your characterization of military service as abandonment to be not only legally baseless, but personally offensive. This court will not tolerate attempts to criminalize patriotic service to our country. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. All of Marcus's motions were denied. Ruby was awarded full ownership of their house, all marital assets, and damages for the money Marcus had stolen. Marcus was ordered to pay Ruby's legal fees and to return all funds he had fraudulently obtained. But the real victory came in Judge Williams' final statement. Mrs. Smith, I want to thank you for your service to our country. You have conducted yourself with dignity and honor throughout this proceeding, while your husband and his associates have shown themselves to be without character or integrity. I am recommending that you receive the maximum possible compensation for the financial and emotional damages you have suffered. As Ruby left the courthouse, she found Detective Morrison waiting for her on the steps. Mrs. Smith, based on the evidence presented today, we're filing criminal charges against your husband for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The Williams family lawyers are also under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. Marcus emerged from the courthouse looking devastated, surrounded by his now former legal team. He caught sight of Ruby and broke away from the group, approaching her hesitantly.
"Ruby," he began, then stopped, unable to find words. "You what, Marcus? You're sorry? You made a mistake? You want to try again?" "I destroyed everything, didn't I?" His voice was barely a whisper. Ruby looked at this man she had once loved, this person she had planned to spend her life with, and felt something she hadn't expected. Pity. "Yes, you did. But the thing you destroyed most was yourself. I'm going to be fine, Marcus. I'm strong, I'm capable, and I have integrity. You threw all of that away for money and status symbols." Marcus began to cry, standing there on the courthouse steps in his expensive suit, finally understanding the full scope of what he had lost. "Ruby, is there any way? Can we ever—" "No," Ruby said firmly, but not unkindly. "There's no way back from this. You didn't just cheat on me, Marcus. You tried to destroy me. You tried to take away everything I had worked for, everything I believed in. That's not something you come back from." 6 months later, Ruby stood in the driveway of her house, now fully hers, watching the moving truck pull away. She had decided to sell the place and start fresh somewhere that didn't hold memories of her failed marriage. The sale had netted her enough money to buy a small farm in the mountains of North Carolina, where she planned to use her medical training to serve rural communities while building a new life for herself. Marcus had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for financial fraud. The Williams family had quietly settled multiple lawsuits and had withdrawn from several high-profile charitable boards to avoid further scandal. Stephanie had indeed been cut off from her family's money, but she had used her own resources to start a nonprofit organization supporting military families dealing with divorce and financial fraud. Ruby's phone rang as she loaded the last box into her truck. It was Colonel Peterson, her former commanding officer. "Ruby, I wanted to congratulate you on your victory. Word of what happened has reached all the way back to the Pentagon. You've become something of a legend among military legal advocates." "Thank you, sir. It was a team effort. I also wanted to let you know that there's a position opening up at Walter Reed Medical Center. They need someone with your experience to head up their new program for treating combat trauma. The job would come with a promotion to captain and a chance to serve soldiers who are dealing with the same challenges you've faced." Ruby felt her heart leap. The opportunity to return to military service, to use her experience to help other veterans, was more than she had dared to hope for. "I'm interested, sir. Very interested." "I thought you might be. I'll send you the details. Ruby, you've shown incredible courage through all of this, not just in how you fought for yourself, but in how you maintained your integrity when it would have been easier to compromise. The Army needs officers like you." As Ruby drove away from the house that had once represented her dreams with Marcus, she felt not sadness, but excitement. The woman who had returned from Afghanistan 18 months earlier had been naive enough to believe that love and loyalty were enough to protect her from betrayal. The woman driving toward her new life understood that strength and integrity were the only things she could truly count on. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Saw the news about your new job. So proud of you. You've turned a nightmare into a new beginning." Ruby smiled as she typed back. Sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived. 3 years later, Captain Ruby Smith stood before a room of young military medics at Walter Reed Medical Center, teaching them about trauma surgery techniques she had perfected in Afghanistan. On her desk was a framed photo of her receiving the Army Commendation Medal for her work with veteran support programs. She had never remarried, but she had built a life filled with purpose, respect, and genuine relationships with people who valued her strength rather than feeling threatened by it. She owned a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains where she spent weekends hiking and reading, finally at peace with herself and her choices. Sometimes, late at night, Ruby would think about Marcus and wonder if he had learned anything from the destruction he had caused. She hoped he had, not for her sake, but for his own. Everyone deserved the chance to grow from their mistakes, even if they could never undo the damage they had caused. But mostly, Ruby focused on the future. She had discovered that the woman who could save lives under enemy fire was also strong enough to rebuild her own life from scratch. The girl who had once needed a man to make her feel complete had evolved into a woman who understood that completeness came from within. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had instead revealed her true strength, and Ruby Smith had never been stronger. As she looked out at her students, young men and women who would soon deploy to dangerous places to save the lives of their fellow soldiers, Ruby knew that everything she had endured had prepared her for this moment. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The nightmare was over. The real life had begun.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.